All right, we might get underway. This is scheduled till 12 o'clock, so just for the delegation's benefit, we'll probably get people come and go over the next 45 minutes as well in a busy parliament. Could I just begin by acknowledging we meet on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I don't think it's a political statement at all to say the ocean needs more friends, especially in this building. And while Australians love the Great Barrier Reef and they know just about everything about it, including the many challenges that it's facing, I think we're increasingly seeing Australians understand that we have another reef system, equally as magnificent, that stretches all the way from New South Wales down to Victoria and Tasmania and across to South Australia and West Australia. And it's defined as a reef system by scientists, as we'll hear from today. And it's called the Great Southern Reef. And it also faces very significant challenges. One that comes to mind, we look at the Great Barrier Reef, and thanks to some very aggressive lobbying by the tourism industry up in the Great Barrier Reef, over many years, they've been able to achieve significant funding packages to help the health of the reef and protect the reef, including for the crown of thorns starfish, which is a native species, an overabundant native species that does a lot of damage. And we've seen very targeted ecosystem interventions on the Great Barrier Reef to help the tourism industry. I think recently over $100 million is allocated to help control the crown of thorns. But down in the Great Southern Reef, we also have an overabundant native species called Centro Urchins, the long-spined sea urchin. And I'd urge you to come up and have a look at the Centro Urchins here if you get a chance, and feel free to pick it up and hold it in your hands. And a lot of work has gone in by a lot of good people, including many of them here today, into trying to come up with a plan and a solution on how we might also stage ecosystem interventions to help control the sea urchin, which is doing also, like the crown of thorns, a lot of damage to habitat and marine systems, and also, of course, the flow-on effects of that go into both our commercial fishing industry, such as the Abalone fishery industry, and of course wreck fishing and wreck fishing values right along the Great Southern Reef. There are a number of other things we're going to cover today, but the delegation's really here to introduce the Great Southern Reef and talk about the issues and the solutions, and I thank them for coming to Canberra today. So I'll now hand it over.
Thanks very much, Pete. Thank you very much for coming along today. My name's Dr. Scott Bennett. I'm a research scientist at the Institute of Marine and Antarctic Studies at the University of Tasmania. I'm also the co-founder of the Great Southern Reef Foundation with Stefan Andrews here. As Pete alluded to, we are extremely privileged in Australia to have grown up and to live around one of the world's most remarkable natural wonders. And this natural wonder, the Great Southern Reef, is under serious threat. And that's really what we're going to talk to you about today with respect to the urchins. The Great Southern Reef spans over 8,000 kilometres around the southern half of Australia. It lies adjacent to 63 federal electorates, and 2/3 of Australia's population live on its doorstep. So 17 million Australians live within 50 kilometres of the Great Southern Reef. The engine room behind the Great Southern Reef are our kelp forests. So these kelp forests span all the way from Canberra in mid-Western Australia, right around the southern coastline, round Tassie, up to the Queensland border. And these kelp forests are immensely productive. So they support a myriad of species, thousands and thousands of species, and remarkably 70 to 80% of the species found on the Great Southern Reef are unique to Southern Australia. They're not found anywhere else on Earth. And to put that in context, if we think about the Great Barrier Reef, around 2 to 3% of species found on the Great Barrier Reef are unique, are endemic. Down here, it's 70 to 80%. And it's not a few species. This is a biodiversity hotspot. This is one of the most diverse marine ecosystems on the planet. And as we said, it's under serious threat. Now, all this huge productivity and diversity also makes these reefs extremely valuable for Australia. And so the Great Southern Reef collectively is worth over $11 billion to the Australian economy per annum. Again, Great Barrier Reef is worth around $6 billion. So it is immensely important, it's immensely large, And it supports some of Australia's most productive fisheries. So rock lobster, abalone, incredibly important fisheries to Australia. They're all highly dependent on these kelp forests and the Great Southern Reef. But these systems are under threat. So climate warming is impacting Southern Australia, the Great Southern Reef, now, immediately. Southeastern Australia in particular is warming at around four times the rate of the global ocean. And just this summer alone, we've experienced one of the most intense marine heat waves on record. And where that's been most strong is, of course, down in the southeastern Australia. So you can see the purple to black patch sitting down there off Tasmania. That's ocean temperatures, and that's the most extreme end of the scale. Here we've got summer sea surface temperatures, which are 3+ degrees warmer than historic summer sea surface temperatures down in Tasmania. So even warmer than the anomalies that we're experiencing on the Great Barrier Reef. These systems are under threat, and climate is a massive driver. But what we're going to talk to you about today is really zoom in on one of the emblematic impacts or symptomatic impacts of this climate warming, and that's the impacts of the long-spine sea urchin, Centro rogesi. And this species expands right down the eastern coast of the Great Southern Reef, and it is one of the most intense, extreme impacts that the reef is currently facing. And so I'd like to hand over to Associate Professor Scott Ling, who will explain more of the impacts of the species.
Great. Thank you, Scott. So the long-spine sea urchin, Centro rogesi, is an endemic species to New South Wales. In recent decades, its numbers have exploded across the southeastern region of the Great Southern Reef. This image here is of long-spine sea urchin overgrazing kelp off St Helens in eastern Tasmania. This is where in the early 80s there was just a handful of urchins identified. The population off eastern Tasmania has now exploded over 30 million individual urchins, and we're seeing more and more of this overgrazing impact. So a healthy kelp forest looks something like this. This is a diver diving in amongst a healthy kelp forest, and these healthy kelp forests support really lucrative species like black-lip abalone, lobsters, and hundreds of other species that live in amongst this forest habitat. What we've been witnessing across the southeastern region of Australia is increasing numbers of sea urchins and this sea urchin invasion, or a climate-driven invasion, along the southern coast of New South Wales, eastern Victoria and Tasmania. Here's an image of an urchin commencing overgrazing in under a giant kelp forest. This is a photo I took back in about 2016. This giant kelp forest and the kelp generally in this area has been lost in recent times. And the full manifestation of urchin overgrazing is shown in this image here, which we've basically got this moonscape. Now, this is an absolute collapse, absolute disaster for our temperate reef systems. Really interesting with the long spine urchin, or urchins generally, is they don't eat themselves out of house and home. They eat all that lush kelp, but then they switch to feeding on microalgae, and they can maintain these collapsed moonscapes indefinitely. An individual urchin can live up to 50 years of age. Once the barrens form like this, you get the juvenile urchins recruiting in greater number, and it's a very difficult challenge to manage. And really what we've learned over 20 years of research is that an ounce of prevention is worth a tonne of cure to cope with this urchin and its overgrazing impacts. So where is this happening? Here we have the Southeast Australian region. The purple dots, you see these bubbles here, the largest bubbles represent 100,000 urchins per hectare of reef. So you can see that the coast of New South Wales in particular, urchin is extremely overabundant. And then you see those bubbles coming into eastern Tasmania. This is where that range extension driven by the 4 times the average rate of ocean warming has occurred. So we're seeing this ocean warming hotspot that's leading driven primarily by the East Australian current, transporting the larvae, which is shown in the inset there. This is a long spine urchin larvae getting swept further and further south. So we're seeing more and more impacts there. We're even seeing our trans-Tasman friends start to see impacts across the northern end of New Zealand, where the East Australian current becomes the East Auckland current. Doesn't change from the EAC, but that is transporting our larvae over to their neck of the woods as well. So we're seeing this increasing abundance of urchins across this range. And one really interesting thing to point out here, Scott Bennett touched on it before, but the scale over which we're seeing this urchin impact is the scale of the Great Barrier Reef. So that's really quite a large impact that relatively very few people know anything about. Now, the other comparison to the Great Barrier Reef and the control program for the crown of thorns in that area is that a crown of thorns outbreak is triggered at 15 starfish per hectare. In some areas here with the urchin, it's 100,000 urchins per hectare. So just on a numerical basis in terms of combating this problem, it's many hundreds times worse or difficult to deal with than that of the crown of thorns. And so really the big impact here is the loss of these kelp bed habitats that support all that biodiversity, all the abalone, all the big ticket items in terms of fisheries production that have historically fueled industries right through this southeast Australian region. And the other thing, we are seeing that this is an ecosystem out of balance. So we have historically removed a lot of the natural predators of these sea urchins. So we've really taken the lid off this urchin and we're seeing this explosion as a result. So we've got southern rock lobster and eastern blue groper in New South Wales as the chief urchin predators. So their numbers are a shadow of their former self. We are recovering them, but this is also symptomatic of big issues across the Great Southern Reef, warming and other human-driven impacts. So it is really a human essential to this story. And on that, I'm going to hand over to Helen, who's going to talk about the impacts in her industry.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So I'm Helen Burville. I'm the Executive Officer for the Eastern Zone Abalone Industry Association. I look after the abalone industry based out of Mallacoota area, which sits on the border of New South Wales and Victoria. The coastline that we have is a 200 kilometre length from Mallacoota down to Lakes Entrance, so it's quite a significant coastline. But we're seeing firsthand the impacts of the urchins. Our abalone quota, a wild catch abalone quota, has gone from 418 tonne down to 208 tonne in over a decade. So in just a decade, we're watching a species slowly being, a collapse of a species, so it's slowly being wiped out, and it's all fingers pointed purely at the urchins. So the urchins eat all of their habitat, and I hope you've had a chance to have a look at the little teeth over there, because they're quite voracious and they eat away all of our kelp. And it's not only the abalone that is suffering, but if the kelp's gone, so are a lot of other species. So it's having a huge impact on our fisheries. And yeah, it's just continual. We can't keep going with urchin barons. So I'd say doing nothing is not an option. So that was just an impact for some of our zone, and doing nothing is not an option. So I'll now throw to Dr. Patrick Hone from the Fisheries Research and Development Corporation.
Yeah, thanks, Helen, and thanks for the introduction. Yes, Patrick Hone, Fisheries Research and Development Corporation. It's quite unique to see the people here today, and it's very unique, this problem. And we had a workshop in Launceston just over a year ago, and one of the key messages we got was, as Helen said, doing nothing is not an option. And also, everyone there kept talking about the win-win. How can we have healthy environments and at the same time have healthy livelihoods or healthy activities that require healthy kelp forests? So how could we achieve both things? And the other thing we clearly got was a message was no more talking. There's a lot of talking about the problem, but not a lot of action. So how could we actually achieve that? And so at the end of the meeting, we all agreed we'd form a task force, and I'm standing here on behalf today of the task force, and that task force is the three jurisdictions, New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. Clearly, this isn't a problem that's controlled by fences. It's an ocean problem. We're connected, we're combined, and not one policy solution will solve this in any one state. We need to work together. Clearly, that is a big problem for all of us. And as we've seen, this is not just the only thing that's happening out there. So we need to be united about how we work. We, as a science group, also, so CSIRO and the FRDC, were very keen to make sure that this was informed by science. So that's why we're there. So we're the support team. We always say science leads, and we always try to make sure that the evidence is there to make those decisions appropriate to the solution that we're looking at. Clearly then the task force set out, and we went and talked to a lot of people down on the beaches, in the community halls around this area to ask them what they wanted to hear. And we've come up with a business plan. It's an action business plan. It's not just another series of research projects. It's highly distorted, in other words, highly pushed that $55 million that we're requesting to on-ground activity, community-based action. And part of this was we were hearing that this community-based action needs to start down on the beach in the water. So when you look at the budget, we have 4 areas of key area that we want to work on. So first of all is the in-water centro control, the central stiffness control. So $30 million of the 55 is going to the in-water control. The next bit is we need to know if we're making a difference. So reef monitoring and modelling was key to that. So $6 million to make sure that if we can tweak, refine, make things better, we can do that. So $6 million for that. The next one is we're going to take the urchin out of the water. We need to do something with it. So we need to make sure that we have that win-win. So what's the value add? How can we improve processing, develop new products, make sure that we're actually got a viable industry out of this? And so there's $8 million to support that outer water component. And then really importantly to everyone, one of the things we heard at the workshop is the real strong role of First Nations people in these regions and the strong opportunity around jobs, activities. And we heard some fantastic things about their divers in the water doing really great things in terms of citizen science and citizen programs to actually remove urchins. So there's $2.5 million there for a whole program around First Nations. And then lastly, there's 3 other elements: research and development, community engagement and communication, and the national management and planning policy framework. And this will require national planning and policy. And clearly we don't have all the policies that connect us across 3 jurisdictions. That is a problem for us. Every time I come to Senate estimates with Peter here, he asks me and I keep saying we just need the right policies. And I know that sounds really weird from research people, but if we don't have the right policies in place, we will get unintended consequences. So we do need good policy framework. Finally, I just want to, leave on a message. This is a highly connected region. We all depend on it in terms of our livelihood. It's critical that we work on this. You could think of the urchin, what we're seeing right now, as part of the canary in the coal mine. If we could solve this problem, we can solve a lot of other really important things in the Great Southern Reef. And the Great Southern Reef needs people to think about it more holistically and think about how we can get those win-wins. So, from a science team and the Centro Task Force, it was a great opportunity for us to actually develop something that is meaningful and different. It'd be lovely to be in the Great Barrier Reef where it's only one region, really. But, at the end of the day, we're a federation. We do need to work across all of our groups. With that, I'd really like to talk and pass over to John here, who's going to talk more about the science and how we plan to respond.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I'm Dr. John Keane, also from the Institute of Marine and Antarctic Studies. Myself and Scott Ling have been researching, this sea urchin for 20 years, and a lot of that research has been solution-driven. How do we find solutions to the problem? So our science has really underpinned the business plan, and the solutions are proven, but at small scale. So these include sea urchin harvest, i.e. commercial fishing industry, urchin culling, predator enhancement to both protect reefs that are there and to rehabilitate or restore the sea urchin barrens. We know if we remove the sea urchins from the reef, from the barren, the kelp will come back naturally within about 18 months. And then once the kelp comes back, the species associated with that kelp will come back, the abalone and the rock lobster, but they'll take a little bit extra time. So the science clearly shows we can do something. Humans have caused the problem, but humans are also part of the solution. So if we can have a viable commercial fishing industry, removing urchins, where we've got extensive urchin barrens, they may not be as profitable, we might have to go down a culling line. In healthy reef habitat, we can enhance predators to protect the reef and protect that kelp forest that's already there. So we have solutions, but we've done this at small scale. And the investment here that the task force will deliver will be able to upscale all those solutions, help commercial fisheries grow, cull where we need to cull, So it's an integrated plan that is really results driven. And I'd like to hand over to Ryan, who's a sea urchin processor, to tell about the processing in his business.
Yeah, thanks, John. My name's Ryan. I'm from a company called South Coast Sea Urchins in Merimbula on the far south coast of New South Wales. We process Centro Sea Urchins between December through till June. It's a very difficult product to process, and it's one of those things that we definitely need help on in developing certain markets overseas. There's currently now 3 export companies that are export approved to send this product overseas. You've got 1 in Tasmania, and you now have 2 in New South Wales. It's still a relatively new market in the export scene. We've had a domestic market for, say, the last 10 to 15 years. And the domestic market helps, but in order to solve and help this problem, we really need to have a large dynamic export market to be able to send this product to. John mentioned about value adding to certain products. Just to give you a little bit of context, when you're processing sea urchins, you only get about 8% of saleable product out of a whole sea urchin. So it's very labour intensive. There's no machinery that can process it. And it's you only get a very small amount that you can take to market. And when you talk about a small amount of roe that comes out of an individual sea urchin, not all of that roe is currently able to be sold in an A grade format. So out of that, you then have B and C grade, and the different grades depend on the different pricing structures. So it's very labour intensive, like I said, and very difficult to move certain grades of products in the international market. So development needs to be done on finding ways to make some more money out of these lower grade products. My company employs 30 individuals processing staff. We have a large contingent of them is Indigenous people that we use from the local community, and I'm pretty sure that it's the same for the other companies as well. The employment that is available from this industry in rural communities is quite large. Between the 2 companies in New South Wales at the moment, we'd probably employ around about 150 people between processing staff, divers, deckhands, all the way through to logistics. It's one of those industries that's very hands-on, and like we said before, it really is a win-win for everyone. The more product that the commercial industry can take off the bottom, it's really going to help. It's not going to solve this problem, but it is definitely going to help. There are certain things that will need to be done alongside science in regards to culling and things like that. We look at the commercial industry as more of a management tool to manage the problem more so than solving the problem. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. My name is Julian. I'm from the Tasmanian Abalone Council, and my role here is to sum up that which has been presented to you today. This delegation has been made up of industry and science personnel and has come from New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. So it's across jurisdiction and across the commercial side of things and the research side of things. The message is, and this is the message the delegation gives to you today, that the Southern Reef system is engulfed in a crisis. The crisis has been caused by an invasion of a sea urchin, endemic originally in middle New South Wales, but with changing water has spread southwards and is now endemic, I guess, in Victoria, and certainly is now present in large numbers in Tasmania and is moving southwards on the eastern coast of Tasmania. 15% of the reef in Tasmania is now barren as a result of these urchins, and the barrenness is expanding. The invasion has led to the destruction of kelp beds, which you've heard about, the loss of habitat, which you've heard about, and the collapse of ecosystems, which you've seen on the screens. The states have responded, the 3 states, extraordinarily together, first time in 1,053 years, to act in a way, in a coordinated way, to try and resolve this issue. Over the past years, as John has said, we've spent a lot of research in understanding the animal and looking at possible solutions. As Ryan has said, the commercial sector is able to assist in managing the problem, but as he makes the point, not solving the problem. The problem remains. 2 years ago, or over a year ago, a task force was established by the 3 states coming together in a workshop, and that national task force was charged with the responsibility of coming up with a business plan, which they have now done. It is a holistic approach. It covers all 3 states. It is a program of projects, and its ask is for a $55 million take over a 5-year period, and that is seen to be in collaboration with the states, where cash and in-kind payments can be made, backing that the Commonwealth contribution. So that's the message that we've got. That's why we're here. Glad that you've been able to come and listen to us and to become more aware of the fact that it's not just water out there, there's a crisis going on underneath the surface. I'm in a position now to invite questions. Maybe my first question, Peter, I could ask of you, because you were the convener of the Senate inquiry into invasive marine species, and you've made your report. You're waiting on response. Can you tell us where that situation is?
Yeah, thanks, Julian. So the government now takes time to consider their response to the Senate inquiry and its recommendations. That can be generally between 6 months and 6 years, depending on the government and the priorities. I would expect that they will make a response within 12 months. Once that response is made, it's then tabled in the Senate, and then we can speak to the response and we can have a debate around the response. And of course, there are other ways for us to prompt the government to respond to this. And of course, coming up to Canberra with this delegation today as an example is a good thing, because it's certainly drawing attention to the issue. So I think once that response is out, then we'll have a clearer picture of what the government how the government's feeling about these. As it's been mentioned a number of times, in fact, it's the name of the Senate report, a win-win for our oceans. Like in all my 12 years in the Senate, I've never seen an issue that's brought people together across the political spectrum and across different governments and different stakeholder groups, where everyone's agreed that this is something we need to do. There's nothing controversial about it, but we've just got to make sure it's a priority for the government. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Peter. The Q&A session is open. If you have a question that you wish to ask of any of us here, we're more than willing to take the question and provide you with an answer.
Thank you for the presentation. You've sort of said that it's a problem that needs to be managed rather than solved. Is there a chance that it could be solved in future, or is it always going to be a management level? And if it's going to be managed, sort of what degree are you going to be able to reduce the damage?
What we have found is that by management, we can see the start of the kelp beds returning, and with the return of the kelp beds, a start of an increased biodiversity within those beds, and there are obviously commercial opportunities associated with that. Without that, though, there are no commercial opportunities.
Is that barren landscape going to be able to be restored somewhat through the effort? Is that landscape going to be restored somewhat through the efforts that you're?
Well, we all believe that an effective management approach can begin to restore the kelp beds. The degree to which we can do that is dependent on the degree to which we are able to have support in order to get ourselves under the water and be doing it. Obviously, those who are involved in the abalone industry can be doing stuff down there against the urchin as well as doing abalone work. But it is going to be very human-centric. It's going to require a lot of people down there doing this sort of thing. Maybe if I throw to Scott or John for further embellishment.
Keen to chip in on that one. I guess, first of all, we've got to stem the bleeding, right? So you've asked whether we can recover these extensive barren grounds, and we can. We have been successful in very localised areas, but the biggest threat is we're still rapidly losing kelp beds. And as I mentioned before, an ounce of prevention is worth a tonne of cure. Once we see the ecosystem collapse, very hard to get it back. You get locked into that collapsed state. So really, when we're triaging this problem, we've got to stem the bleed, and that is the loss of the kelp beds from southern New South Wales down to eastern Tasmania, which for eastern Tasmania, we are looking at the growth rates of the urchin and the rate of barrens increase. It's quite disturbing to think we could have half of our east coast of Tassie as urchin barrens for those reef systems below about 6 metres of depth. So we are basically becoming like New South Wales. We've seen it play out in real time. It's really looking very dire. So we've first got to stem the bleeding, but in those areas where we've put in a lot of effort, incentivised catch there, we can actually recover these barren grounds. So there is hope, but what it's going to take is a triage approach. There are different tools in different scenarios. We mentioned predator enhancement can be really effective at keeping a lid on things and being that ounce of prevention. Where we've got the collapsed barrens, we need that tonne of cure. It is a hard reset, which involves lots of divers culling and a lot of work at depth. And they are limited to the depth they can go to. So there are barrens that go down to 35, 40 metres or so. And while we're triaging this problem, we've got to probably let those areas go in the short term until we develop deep water techniques. But I'll hand over to John to add it to King back.
Short answer to your question is yes, they can be recovered. Barrens can be recovered, but it's a costly exercise. It's going to take time, and it will require human intervention, culling out in the open in the extensive barrens, but also fisheries working along the kelp edge over multiple years, over multiple seasons. You can slowly push the barrens back. So both fishing and culling can help decrease the size of the barrens. Yes, yeah. So the two things here, the risk for existing fisheries within those healthy kelps is huge. Your current abalone fisheries, your rock lobster fisheries, for example, our two most very valuable fisheries are under extreme threat. So we've got to protect them as well as restoring habitat and developing an urchin fishery.
Just might be worth mentioning, so while we're talking urchins today, we're also talking other complementary things. So clearly one of the things we are trying to indicate is that healthy reefs are actually valuable in their own right. So that's that nature financial value. So there's a lot of talk about blue carbon, there's talk about other opportunities. So we've got the restoration programs as well. So, we've got these other complementary things. So it's really important. That's why we all want to work together, because we need to integrate what we're doing. I think your question about are we just talking about management, or will we ever see a solution? I mean, we're all optimistic people. We want healthy reefs, and we do think that an integrated program where we keep talking win-win, there's no losers, is the way to go. Clearly, the task force talks about 5 years, but this is not a 5-year problem. What we're just talking about now is where we can get to actually do an immediate action. But the longer term is we've got to aim back to have those healthy reefs, which will need other measures. That's why I always talk about the policy framework. It's going to be really important.
Yeah, and I think this is where the Crown of Thorns management program has been really useful to illuminate the task force recommendations, and it came up during the workshops that Patrick and others organised. They're very definitive interventions to help the tourism industry on the Great Barrier Reef, like removing Crown of Thorns in areas where they want to take their boats, and there are some other programs, but that's essentially it. And I think everybody agreed that eradication of the sea urchins, well, it's not possible even if you wanted to, because they're native to New South Wales, it wouldn't happen anyway, but there would be some very specific things that could be done. And Julian from the Tasmanian Abalone industry, they've been funding divers through a subsidy. Part of their levy that paid to government's been going to actually giving divers a dollar amount per sea urchin they catch. And so therefore they have seen, where they've been doing that, they've seen some really good results because there's an incentive there to catch them and develop them into markets. So yeah, I'm really optimistic that there's a lot we can actually do to help stem the tide, but there's billions of them out there, I understand.